What is going on, everybody? Carter here with Edged Mindset. If you would be so kind, check me out on Instagram, edged_mindset, at edged_mindset. Give me a follow if you would be so nice to do so. I could really, I've neglected that platform. I have neglected it hard, but I'm kind of back in it. Like, I'm enjoying browsing accounts there, but Instagram has made it really, really hard to find people. You can't really find new people, so we got to do this kind of stuff now. We got to do the marketing stuff where we have to tell people to go find us. So go find me on there. If you're on that platform, give me a follow. I'll follow you back. All good. So this video, I want to talk about something that's been kind of brewing in my brain for a while now, and I haven't fully been able to articulate how I want to present it, how I want to bring it up, what my point is that I'm trying to make. But I recently did that video about the Oz XL, the Oz Rosie XL, and I kind of compared it to like a Strider haphazardly, but mainly what I was talking on is me trying to quantify how things have changed in the knife industry and why I'm struggling to connect with modern knives. If you want to watch that video, it's a couple videos back. Go check it out. Might provide a little bit of context for this one, but absolutely not necessary to dive into this. So the main point of this video is I want to ask you guys, and I want to discuss the concept of, is offshoring and manufacturing of knives hurting the knife maker's brand? Right? I think that's how I want to put it. So the main makers that I want to use as an example for this, and this is by no means me trying to throw any shade or anything to any of these people, right? I want to make sure that's clear. This is not a trash talking video, and if it starts to seem like I'm stepping into that territory, it is completely unintentional. It's just me having a one-sided conversation, and I'm getting kind of lost in what I'm saying. But the main brands I want to bring up as an example for this is Demko, Brian Nadeau of Sharp Eye Design, and Chavez Knives. So what I'm talking about here is I've noticed with those brands in particular, and I know there's a bunch more. Those are the ones that kind of come to my mind. All of those brands have done production offshoring to some extent. Demko with cold steel, obviously the 8010. This is actually an 8010 cold steel. I'm sorry, I don't have good examples. I've actually owned most of these brands that I'm talking about. I've owned the custom version as well as their offshored production line, except for Brian Nadeau and Sharp Eye Design. All the other ones, though, I've owned production versions and custom versions. I just don't have them right now. So we're going to use this as a stand-in for kind of offshore example of a machined style knife. It's not necessarily the best example, but it's what I have. And I do have a production offshore of Chavez right here. These are all just, and then the 8010. This one is just for example. This one is just, I don't know. I haven't had it in a video in a while, so I'm going to put it here. So what really sparked this is the Arch Nemesis from Brian Nadeau, Sharp Eye Design. Really love that model. A lot of people do. It is and I will try to put a picture up here. It is a double-edged dagger folding knife, sharp on both sides, really elegant, really strong design. Now, Brian has been making knives for a long time, and his thing is kind of that modern thing of a quote-unquote fully machined knife, right? Really heavy on CNC machining, the primary bevels, the handles, almost everything, right? There's very little manual handwork on those knives, right? And a lot of people like those because they're very, very precise and they're very, very repeatable. They know if they buy one of those knives, it is going to behave and feel pretty much identical to everybody else's. You know, one of the things with old school, not that this is that old school, but it's the example I have here, old school custom knives, is there's so much handwork on it. Individual knives can be different. The action can be different. You might get a custom knife from a maker that was totally hand built, and maybe it's got a little detent lash. Maybe it's not as smooth. Maybe the lockup is earlier or later than your buddies. You know, there would be differences in how these things were made. That's somewhat of the appeal, right? Because it's clear evidence that that knife was made with love by hand, and the one you have is not exactly like anyone else's. But a lot of people don't like that. They want to know if they get an arch nemesis, it's going to be just like their friend's arch nemesis. It's going to have the same action, the same lockup, the same quality, all those things. So that's a big push right now, and it's quite popular to have fully machined, quote unquote, custom knives or small batch production knives, whatever you want to call it. You know, the term custom knife has changed so much all the time. It's kind of a loaded term. I remember back when I first got into knives, it was loaded then. You know, back then, there was a school of people that would call a custom knife, if it wasn't specific, one-off, handmade for you, it wasn't a custom knife. But then that's all changed. That's all changed now. I don't even know what custom knives are. Nobody even says mid-tech anymore. Who knows? Small batch production or custom knives. A lot of people gravitate towards those for some of those reasons. They like the precision, they like the repeatability, they like how clean they look, that kind of thing. So a lot of makers are doing that. Now, it's not necessarily Chavez or Demko that fall into that category, but these two kind of illustrate the point I'm clumsily trying to get to. So, Arch Nemesis, very popular knife. I'm very drawn to it. But Sharp Eye Design also has a very strong line of knives made by Riot. And the thing is, when you are taking knives that are designed and built to be made by a machine, which is primarily what Sharp Eye Design does, and then you connect with an offshore knife manufacturer that has top tier, top of the line capability to make those knives, what you end up with is production knives that look very, very close to the quote-unquote custom or small batch American knives, or whatever country knives, right? Not only in how they look, like the details, but also the action and the quality. Because most of the work is up front, most of the work on those kind of knives, and I'm using Sharp Eye Design as an example, but it includes all of these machine first manufacturing. Most of the work is done in the knife design. Obviously, you got to design the knife, 3D model it, and then also the programming, right? Which is a huge skill, amazing skill, to be able to program these machines to execute this knife correctly. But after that front end work, it can be repeated by anybody that has machines capable of executing that programming for the most part. Obviously, I'm simplifying things a little bit, but broad strokes, high level, you can now make that knife if you have machines capable of running that programming and doing the level of milling and things needed to execute that knife. Kind of like a painter, right? Most of the work is designing what the piece is going to be and then putting paint to canvas. And then you could do reproductions of that and sell that, right? But there's the original and then there's the reproduction. It's somewhat along those kind of lines. And so with the Arch Nemesis, and this is why I find this particular example so interesting, Brian specifically said, I will not have that one made by an offshore company, by anybody but me, right? I'm going to keep that one in-house, which is great, which is awesome. Except I still can't help but think, like, when they pop up and they're $1,600 direct, $2,000 on the aftermarket, I can't help but think that file, and I know I'm simplifying, but that file could have been included with the files for the other knives being made by Riot, and it could be made by Riot to the same standards if he wished. Like, he could just give those files to Riot. They could make that knife for, I would imagine, $100 is their cost per unit, something like that. Now, Brian's choosing not to do that because he wants something his own. But that's still, for me, that still kind of taints it. And it shouldn't, right? It really shouldn't, because it's an amazing knife, amazing design, made by an amazing person. But I still, in the back of my mind, I struggle paying that much money for something I know could have been made by Riot had he decided to do that. Or, even worse, he could change his mind. He could say, you know what? Screw it. I want the money. I'm going to have Riot make an Arch Nemesis, and change his mind. And now all of a sudden you've got a production version of the custom version. And I would imagine he would do a very simplified, watered down version. But if he wanted, Riot's capable of executing his full design as he does it in-house. I guarantee you. They can. I mean, if you look at it, like modern Chinese manufacturing, is top tier. I mean, this is made in like this is top tier. This very well could execute a Sharp Eye design model complete to the standards and look of one of his in-house custom-made knives. And it creates an interesting conundrum, right? Because then all of a sudden you're saying, well, it's still an in-house produced knife. It's still a knife that Brian has touched, he's sharpened, he did whatever hand finishing there is. There's still value there, which is absolutely true. But logically, I kind of struggle with it. Now, in a similar vein, we have Chavez, right? Which is also a similar type thing. His production knives look very close to his custom knives. Very close. He also uses, coincidentally, Riot for his production knife making. Now, rather than holding certain models necessarily in-house, I mean, he kind of does. He hasn't produced every single custom pattern overseas, but he's kind of done the main ones, right? The Redención and the Scapegoat and the Liberation and all those. He kind of chooses to limit the finishings that are available, and then he also chose to go with like a thinner blade stock. And with the production version, he actually has a lock bar insert, which he doesn't do in-house, but he could. I mean, he could make a faithful reproduction of his custom knives down to the minute detail with Riot as well. And I struggled with that. I actually got into custom Chavez knives for a while, and it did somewhat bother me how close it looked to my production version. I had a custom Scapegoat, and then I had a production Scapegoat. And aside from some finishing changes, which honestly, the custom Scapegoat I had the crosshatch lines on it, and the production version I had didn't, but he's done a production version with the crosshatching. Like, even the grind lines that Riot does is eerily similar to the hand grinding that Ramon Chavez does on his custom line. Really the only difference, like broad strokes, if you're looking at it, really the only way to tell the difference would be the lock bar insert and the thinner stock on the production. Other than that, you would have to be very, very well versed. Well, there's the signature too. He puts a signature on the blade. You'd have to be very well versed to know that that is a production or custom knife. And I'll be honest, I would show my custom Chavez and people would assume that it was a production knife or a production knife that had been modified. And it shouldn't bug me because it's stupid, right? But it did kind of bug. It did kind of bug me, especially when you're talking about that level of money. Part of this hobby, like it or hate it, is being able to show off cool stuff that you have. Being able to post pictures, being able to meet up with people in real life and say, hey, this is the collection I have. They look at it and they're like, wow, that's cool because I've never seen anything like this before. And that's the allure of old school custom knives, is that they weren't reproducible by production means. For example, this right here is not reproducible by production means. This has hand finishing and chemical processes that are not conducive to mass production, particularly this magma finish here. Now, is it possible to create a production way of doing this? Maybe, but it wouldn't be worth it unless it could be used on a mass scale. But a lot of the more modern knives aren't doing stuff like this, right? This isn't in vogue anymore. Kind of the rough, organic, chemical, hand finishing type stuff. It's not really in vogue. Right now, people want clean and crisp everything, which coincidentally, machines are really good at doing. So we've entered into an interesting age. Now, along with the Chavez and Sharp Eye design, which, the Sharp Eye design is the main thing that sparked this, right? That whole arch nemesis, me wanting one, but just kind of struggling with getting one because of that production line, as well as one more thing on Sharp Eye design, as a casual supporter of the brand and liker of the brand, I'll pop into like the fan forum and I'll look around and I'll be honest, I don't know what's a custom and what's production. Obviously this is the context of somebody that's not heavily involved in the brand. I don't know everything. I don't follow it closely, but as a casual fan of the brand and as a knife enthusiast, I pop in there. I don't know what's what. It kind of all looks the same. Somebody will show like a production derecho, I think that's how you pronounce it. And maybe they've modified a little bit, and I think it's a custom. Or vice versa. Somebody will show a custom, and it's not until I see the price that I'm like, oh, I guess that's not the re-op made one. I can't tell the difference. But anyways, on to Demco. This one's a little bit of a different example, although kind of similar, because Demco has a similar type aesthetic. Like his isn't fully machined, but even his old school customs were very utilitarian first, so he didn't do a lot of artistry. And it was very simple shapes and simple lines and things like that. So it's very much something that could be easily made in a production knife, which it has been. But in the case of Demco, and particularly the 8010, I've always had a big love of the 8010, but I feel like the fact that it was a knife that was produced by cold steel has kind of tainted the design. I'm not really seeing much fanaticism over the 8010 model as much as I think it deserves. And I suspect it has to do with the fact that it was produced by cold steel. And no matter if it's a new full titanium, anodized, hand ground by Demco 8010, I feel like most people still see a cold steel 8010 when they look at it. And once again, I did have a custom 8010, and when I would show it off, post pictures, people assumed that it was cold steel. Cool, nice cold steel. I like the 8010. You know, it's kind of permanently tainted that brand, at least for the model. Now, obviously, he's moved on to the 8020, which is outside of, you know, the cold steel stuff, but I still feel like the ghost of cold steel is going to haunt him for quite a while, and it's probably going to haunt the 8010 potentially forever. Now, once again, I might be totally off base here. These are observations that I've made. These are things that I've thought about. All of these knives sell like hotcakes. So clearly this isn't a widespread thing preventing people from buying these things, right? The arch nemesis is not struggling to find a home. They sell out in seconds. People love that model. They love Brian's stuff, which I do too. I really like his designs. I'm just wondering if there's anybody else out there like me that kind of gets hung up on these things. And it's kind of dumb, because if you like the knife, get the knife, right? No need to overthink it. Doesn't matter where it's made. You know, the only thing that might play into is whether it's priced right and things like that. But if you like the knife, get the damn knife. But for some reason, for me, I get hung up on these things. I want my expensive custom knives to be special. I want somebody to see that knife and say, wow, there's no way I could get something like that. And I feel like with modern knife making, we're blurring those lines where a lot of the show-off pieces can be made from a production standpoint. And to me, it takes a little bit of that specialness away. Now, I don't have a solution for this. I don't think there is one. I think it's just a sign of the times, and it's how things are. Production knives have become immensely amazing. This isn't something that could have been made 10 years ago. And certainly not at the cost that it's being made. And yet now we're in a time where things like this, this is an outstanding, objectively, from a technical manufacturing standpoint, this is a marvel of modern machining, that something like this could be made. And then on top of it, you have how inexpensively it can be made in countries like China. And it's like, what do you do? Not make these? It is an amazing knife that people back in the day would never be able to experience if they didn't spend thousands of dollars on a custom knife, which honestly might not even be as well made as this one. So, all right, there's some ramblings. Let me know if you feel the same at all, if you struggle with any of this stuff, or if I am just a crazy person. Comment down below. Thanks everybody for joining. I will catch you on the next video.